Well, good morning. This is me, Mom. 2018 started out with great promise. Gary and I were enjoying our new life together, and I knew that God had put Gary in my life, and he had truly been a blessing. He was good company, and I was no longer alone, and neither was he. And the most unbelievable thing was he was no trouble. He washed his own clothes, made his bed, mopped the kitchen, and vacuumed. He would have cooked, but he liked my cooking, but he insisted on washing the dishes. I'd never had it so good, and I hardly knew what I was supposed to do. And when I told him how much I appreciated all the help, he says, "Well, I live here too." I thought, what a refreshing thought. So since he helped me with the housework, we had a lot more time to play, and so we had gone to the mountains with Franklin and Wileen. We had gone to his sister's house that was in the mountains in North Georgia. And then another trip that Franklin and Wileen took with us, we went to Sky Valley, and we were there for a weekend. And in the meantime, we were going places and doing things. And we enjoyed going to yard sales. He particularly liked to go. And every time we went to a yard sale, he would always ask them, "Do you have any camping equipment?" And I thought, well, why? I mean, we got all the camping equipment we could possibly need. But he'd been wanting to take me camping, and we hadn't got around to going. And so one Saturday morning while we were out looking at the garage sale, he asked the guy, "You have any camping equipment?" He said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do it. I've got a tent that's never been used, still in the box." And so we went over and looked at it, and it was a 12-man tent. And Gary says, "Well, how much do you want for it?" So he said $50, so we bought a tent for $50. Well, I don't know how they'd have put 12 people in there unless they'd been like logs, but anyway, it was a beautiful tent, and it turned out to be about the size of a good queen-size bedroom. So anyway, we were excited about the tent, so we made plans to go camping. And so now Gary never complained about being sick or that he had worked past his endurance, but I knew. And someone else might have thought that he was slack or lazy, but I knew that he didn't feel good whenever there were things that, like washing the dishes, he would put it off, and I'd go ahead and do it. And I was going to do those, but I knew he didn't feel good. And by this time, I realized that the incident we'd had on the mountain, whenever I thought he was just too unnerved to drive, I knew that he had had an attack with his heart. But the time that he picked for us to go camping, I should have known. He always wanted it to be the very best so that I could enjoy it. He wanted me to have a good time. So the day we picked, or the week we picked, it was not too hot and it was not too cold. It was just right and beautiful weather. And he got all the stuff packed that we would need, the dishes and the pots and pans that he'd already washed, and got the car packed and fishing rods and tackle. And we drove about 45 minutes to get to the campsite on the river. And so, of course, we had to take all that stuff out before we could get down to the tent. And by the time we got to the tent, he wasn't able to put the tent up. And I had never put up a tent, but I thought, well, I'll read these instructions, and I did. And so I did. I was able to get the tent up, and by that time, he was ready to get the things that we needed. He had 3 lanterns, and he placed them up because we didn't have any electricity. We had water, but we didn't have any electricity. So then we had supper, and we were relaxing around our fire pit when his sister and brother drove up. So they spent the evening with us, and we had a great time together. And then for the next 2 or 3 days, we had Franklin and Wileen come one day, and then we had Bill and Holly come one day, and then we were going to have another day where we invited a lot of people, and we would all have a fish fry. But I knew that Gary was not well, and so I told him, I said, let's just go home. So we had to come home. And so by this time, I knew that he needed to go back to the doctor, and I finally talked him into it. Well, the doctor told him that he was going to have a heart catheterization. Well, and then he was going to put in a pacemaker. Well, when Gary found out that, he wouldn't even talk about it. He said no way was he going to do that. So I tried to get all of our friends to talk him into it, and of course I was praying, but Gary was stubborn. He had a made-up mind. He wasn't going to have a pacemaker put in. So anyway, things rocked on, and I was being very busy in His Majesty's Daughters, and because I was the president, and this had to happen. And it was marvelous. We had such a great time. The way God had shown me how to organize everything, it ran like a clock. The praise and worship was some of the best I'd ever participated in. The testimonies were great. The food was delicious and presented in such a beautiful manner. And the decorations and our hostess were beautiful. So I believe God was pleased and was glorified. And we prayed for many people. And most of the people that we prayed for were saved, but there was one girl that came in, and she was a Buddhist, and she gave her life to Jesus. And then we heard of testimonies of people that we prayed for that God had healed. So the only thing that was disappointing to me was I wish that there was more people that would come. We usually had as many as 35 people come at one time, but they didn't all come. And see, here I was expecting hundreds, and we had a small number, so that was the only thing that I was ever disappointed in. But the rest of us, the one that were committed and we did the work, we'd accomplished the purpose for His Majesty's Daughters, because we did have love for each other. We had unity, we had acceptance, and we had fellowship. So it was a great time. And so one day later on, Gary was feeling really good, and he wanted to go fishing, and he'd gone fishing by himself all of his life, but I felt uneasy because of what had been happening, but he insisted, so he went fishing one day, and I realized it was getting dark and he hadn't come home, and I tried to call him, but I couldn't get him on his cell phone, so I thought, what in the world's going on? And I guess it's probably about 30 minutes after it was getting really dark by then. There was a car drove up under our carport, excuse me, and it was Gary in the car with a state patrolman. He had brought Gary home because Gary had been rear-ended while he was driving on a 4-lane drive, and that really unnerved him. He wasn't physically injured except bruises and a little bit of soreness, but it really traumatized him. He didn't want to drive anymore, and he really was nervous just driving in the car with me for several weeks afterwards. And so in March then, he was having trouble breathing again, because I know now that it was congestive heart failure, and the water was building up. And I tried to get him to go to the doctor, but no, he wasn't going to go to the doctor, and he was stubborn. Whenever he made up his mind, he didn't do it. But the next day, he wasn't any better. As a matter of fact, he was worse. And I didn't ask him to let me take him. I said, I'm taking you to Savannah, to the emergency room. We're going to find out what's wrong with you. So he was in such bad shape, he decided that he'd go with me. So we went down there, and they drawed all the water off of his heart, and he was able to breathe again. And they kept him for 3 or 4 days, but he was ready to come back home. So it took him a few days to get over that. But then he was acting normal again. He was acting like himself, and it was so great to have him acting normal again. So his birthday was March the 31st, and I knew that he hadn't had an awful lot of birthdays in his life, parties at least. And so I decided that I was going to give him a special birthday party. So I did, and I invited Marvin and Lisa, and they came with Andrew, and his sister came and spent the weekend with us. And then I invited all of his family, but unfortunately, for different reasons, they couldn't come. But his nephew came the following day, and we'd had birthday cake and ice cream on his birthday, so we had birthday cake and ice cream again when Kirk came. And then on Monday, I had a group of ladies come to the house, and I was the hostess. We played cards once a month, and so they were there, and we played cards, and we had cake and ice cream again. And every time we'd sing happy birthday to Gary, and he just loved it. I mean, you could just see how pleased it made him. So I was thrilled about that. So then on Tuesday on a Monday, this was the 2nd of April, I was outside working in the yard, and he was watching me from the porch because he wasn't able to do that. And so about lunchtime, he said, why don't we go to Subway and get a sandwich for lunch? So I drove, but he went inside and got us a sandwich, and we brought it back and sat down on the porch and to have our picnic. And it was a beautiful day. The skies were blue, and it was warm, and we'd see birds flip by, and squirrels scamper up the trees, and it couldn't have been a more perfect day to have a picnic. So we thoroughly enjoyed it. And the next day then was April the 3rd. And I got up for breakfast, and Gary hadn't been able to sleep in the bed for a long time, and he usually slept on the couch or in his chair. So that morning I noticed he was sitting in his chair all curled up with a blanket on him. And I went into the kitchen and made coffee, and I brought him a cup, and I said, Gary, I got you some coffee, and he didn't respond. And so I said, Gary, and I went over and touched him, and he had departed this life. He'd gone to be with Jesus. So I was shocked, to say the least. And then I thought, what a way to go. I don't believe he ever woke up. It appeared as if he just went to sleep, and that was it. It was such a blessing for me to know how much he had enjoyed the last few days of his life here on earth. And so grateful and thankful that his passing was so peaceful. Gary had been a wonderful blessing in my life, but now he was gone. Another loss in my life. I'd lost both parents, 3 sisters, 2 brothers, 1 niece, 2 nephews, and 2 husbands. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew who held my future. And what a blessed assurance that is. Thank you for listening. So listen, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks.